Good afternoon. It's so nice to see so many familiar names in the participant list. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Bairnsfather. I am the director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Holocaust Center, and then we will be able to get underway with today's program. The Holocaust Center is a 42-year-old organization, and we've adapted with the times. Our mission is to connect the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with the injustices of today. Through education, the Holocaust Center empowers individuals to build a more civil and humane society. And this is where the Holocaust Center finds strong alignment with the point of view of Prime Stage Theater. We're going to begin today's program with the trailer for The White Rose. And then we'll be able to get into our discussion with our artists on the panel today.
Lass flickor eller bjuda på honom. Nödvändigt stark
Heil Hitler!
No one ever talked about what was really happening, but we knew. Even as children, we knew something bad was going on.
What are you reading? That book there, what is it?
Poetry?
Whose poetry?
Heinrich Heine?
Heinrich Heine was a Jew.
The press, the radio, the TV, they're all run by the Nazis. And if anybody dares to print the truth, the Nazis say it's fake and arrest them. Every single word out of Hitler's mouth is a lie.
Every person deserves the government it is willing to tolerate. Leaflets of the White Rose.
Derjenige, der die Jugend hat, hat die Zukunft.
Oof. That's so powerful. I just needed a moment.
Yeah.
The Holocaust Center and Prime Stage have worked together for many years in various ways, from teacher trainings to theatrical productions and the programs around them. Last year, we began a partnership to produce a play each April to mark Genocide Awareness Month. April is Genocide Awareness Month because so many genocides are remembered this month. The worst events of multiple genocides happened in the month of April. And indeed, today marks the day of remembrance of the Armenian genocide, which occurred 107 years ago. Our inaugural Genocide Awareness Month production in 2021, Miracle in Rwanda, reached thousands of viewers around the world. This year, we are proud to come together again to offer The White Rose. And I know that Brinda, who's on our panel today, will tell you more about it. You've just seen the trailer. It's available to stream starting today through May 8th. Between now and then, we will convene global student exchanges around this story of students in Munich coming together to expose the lies in Nazi propaganda. Leaflets of the White Rose appeared first around Munich, then spread to other cities in Germany in an act of courageous, heroic resistance against the Nazi regime. The story of student resistance has inspired educators and artists for many years. Today, it's my pleasure to host this conversation with a distinguished panel of creators while we consider the legacy of the White Rose as told through art. We will see the global significance, the legacy of the White Rose. Questions the panel will discuss were submitted by staff of museums in Poland and South Africa. For our audience today, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. We will moderate the Q&A and pose your questions to the panel. As I prepared for this program, it was striking to me how universal the message, do what's right, even if it's the harder thing to do. Thank you for joining us. And to begin, I would like to invite Wayne Brinda to introduce himself. Wayne.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to also to work with you and the Holocaust Center for many, many years, and especially on this special project and program that we've been doing for the past 2 years. It's unfortunately, it's very timely. It's very needed. It's very, very important. And we're hoping that this will really inspire people of all ages to really look at what you can do. I know as a professor of college students, as well as being a producing director of Prime Stage, it's in our 25th season. I see young kids and I see college students thinking, well, what can we do? Or is there anything we can do, or this? And it's like looking at the bravery, the courage, and just the integrity and the determination of the young college students and their professor to really do something, to see something that needed to be done and express it and do something about it is inspirational for everybody, and especially for our young people. And this is why we're really glad to be doing this, and also with the global classroom that we're reaching young people. Young people are the future, you know, and it really is true. And we really want to really make sure that comes across. We're also very pleased to be having the support and guidance from Wolfgang Huber when we developed the production, Wolfgang is the son of Professor Huber, who worked with the students to create the White Rose leaflets. And he worked very closely with Jim DeVita, the playwright, and us, and giving us insights and giving us things that we really could put into the play. Because one of the things that's important about Prime Stage is we're not just doing a play, we do programs. And we make sure that what we're doing is authentic and accurate. That is so important, especially with this topic, but with everything we do. So we were really honored to be working with Wolfgang on this. The script by noted playwright James DeVita brings to life the amazing courage of Sophie, Scholl, Hans Scholl, and others who, as Sophie says, someone had to make a start. What we wrote and what we said is what everyone is thinking, but they're too afraid to speak out in this country. I did the best I could do for my country. I think that kind of puts everything together with his story. So we hope that you will watch and be inspired by The White Rose, which is streaming now through May 8th. And we encourage others to see this true story, and you encourage others to see this true story of what young people and everybody can do. And after watching the performance, we look forward to reading your thoughts as you email them to us, and you can email them to us through admin@primestage.com. And also, I want to really thank Wayne and Marcel and Art for joining us, because I guess you're going to see the power of the arts to really propel and to really inspire. This is really what this is all about. It's not just theater, it's the arts working together. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Art DeConciliis, the director of The White Rose, and Art, take it from there.
Thanks, Wayne. I appreciate it. And thank you, Lauren, for letting me participate today. I've been an actor and director in the Pittsburgh area for 40 plus years. Every so often, a wonderful opportunity comes your way to really do something that will make a difference. And I think that's what every artist strives for. For me, this has been that project. This has been one of those projects. You saw the one slide in the trailer that is a quote by Hitler about, you know, he who has the youth has the future. I think that's something that I really kept in the forefront of my mind when we were working on the White Rose project, not just because these young individuals made a difference, that it was the youth that stood up, youth that could have chosen very simply to let things happen. There's a line in the play that Sophie says, I could have done nothing. After all, I was the correct race. They could have stood idly by and let things just happen, or you know, turned a blind eye, but they didn't. They got involved. And when the youth got involved, there's power and there's energy. And in working with this project with young actors, I felt and saw that same thing happen. I know that the experience of working on the project changed the actors that were chosen to work on it, that were cast. In addition, we're hoping that viewing this project makes an impact and imprints on the youth that see it, the importance of knowing what's right, speaking up when we see injustice, when we see inhumanity, knowing that it's all of our responsibility to be heroes. And that's what these young people were in the White Rose Project. Everyday German citizens, young adults who became heroes.
And with that in mind, I'd like, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say what a perfect seg to
Yep.
Marcel Walker.
Yes.
Marcel.
Well, hello, everyone. And hi, hello. My name is Marcel Lamont Walker. I'm the lead project artist and project coordinator for the educational comic book series, Hutzpah, Superheroes of the Holocaust, which was launched, oops, a little fuzzy there. It's here, I swear. Which was launched by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh in 2014. Thank you, Lauren. Hutzpah was created with a contemporary approach toward Holocaust education in schools. And as lead artist, I've worked in tandem with comics writers and the staff of the Holocaust Center to bring the true stories of survivors, rescuers, and others involved in the Holocaust to life. Many of these stories come directly from the survivor community here in Pittsburgh. And as project coordinator for Hutzpah, I work directly with regional comics creators and coordinate their work with research from the Holocaust Center staff to produce stories that are true to their sources, historically accurate, dramatic, succinct, and accessible. The center also distributes Hutzpah to educators nationwide, and we work with them and their students to get the most understanding out of the content. To date, we've produced 4 volumes of Hutzpah, each of them reflective of a different theme. In the second volume, we explored the stories of international heroes who all had engaged in active resistance against the Nazi regime during World War II. One of those stories focused on Sophie Scholl and her group of activists, the White Rose. I've loved working on this series, Hutzpah, and sharing these stories with new audiences. And I'm glad to be here today to talk about the importance of that story specifically, both in our comic book and related media. So thanks to Lauren and Art and Wayne for including me in today's discussion about inspiration and art. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today. And I turn this over from a moment here to Wayne Wise.
Hey, thanks, Marcel. And thanks everyone for inviting me to be a part of this and the participants for coming. I guess I want to talk a little bit about my creative process on this and end it with a personal anecdote. I'm the lead writer on the Hutzpah series. Sophie's story was in the second issue, but the story of the White Rose was there from the beginning. The project started out as a series of art panels for the Three Rivers Arts Festival, and I did a drawing of Sophie at the time. So I kind of lived with her story for a couple of years before sitting down to write it. From the beginning, it always just really struck me very personally. My approach as a writer with these stories is to, in the 6 pages of comics that I have to tell these stories, is to hit the high points of what are the important elements of the story. But I also pay very close attention to the parts that just really speak to my heart. And Sophie's story did that really very strongly. The year that I was working on that story, I was teaching a class at Chatham University, and I had a room full of 20-year-old girls who were Sophie's age. There's one picture of Sophie where she has this short, funky, contemporary hairstyle. She's laughing. She looks so full of life, and she could have been any one of the students who sat in my class that year. And the bravery and grace with which she went to her death. I mean, there's no better way of saying that. Just every time I think about it or read her last words, I still choke up a little bit. So in an effort to tell this story, just the fidelity to her words and the words of the White Rose was important. But I also wanted to say that bravery and grace. And I will say I was struck in watching the trailer, which that's the first time I saw that, how much of the imagery, the imagery on the floor, which is based on a memorial that is a real life memorial. That's the final panel of our story. Sophie twirling and throwing the leaflets are a couple of the primary images that we have in the story on the cover as well as in the story itself. So the overlap among these different art presentations, I think, are just really very striking and very important. So thanks for having me be a part of this.
I've done that thing that I'm sure we all do in Zoom meetings every day, which is mute ourselves and then don't unmute ourselves. So I'm back now. I hope you all can hear me. What we did this year is we wanted to engage international perspectives, and I mentioned that briefly. So we put questions out to some of our global partners in Poland and in South Africa, and they've responded with some questions for everyone on the panel. And I want to ask them, and I want to encourage you again, everyone who's on the program, to please use the Q&A feature. We had one question about how many people are on this program because you can't see it. Right now we're at 34. So yeah, we have a very nice audience from all over on this program, and we want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A, as I said. So this is how we pose the question to our international partners. Our play, The White Rose, tells an enduring story of resistance against the Nazis. Today, we're reflecting not only on how we keep stories like these alive, but on what can be accomplished by using various art forms to do so. Given what you've seen personally of the power of art in preserving Holocaust memory, and that we're speaking to 3 artists who've told the White Rose story in various artistic media through writing, drawing, performance, what is something you would like to ask them? So that's as we pose the question to our partner. Tally Nates, who is a wonderful woman in South Africa at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, asks, can each one of you reflect on what was the most impactful element in this story that inspired you to create your art, and how do you hope your art will inspire others? So I'm going to take what I get to do as the person who's leading the conversation and take this back to Wayne Wise, because Wayne, you were getting at that a bit with your students. So let me repeat what Tally's question was. Yes? Because
Yes,
you answered some of
Yes,
it, but not all of it. Okay. Can each one of you reflect on what was the most impactful element in this story that inspired you to create your art? And how do you hope your art will inspire others?
Yeah, I think some of it just, there was that element of it, and I come from a comics background. That's why I write this stuff. It's what I teach. There was some element of it initially, before I knew the whole story, was this group of students who form a secret society and give it a name of the White Rose that just felt very secret society to me. It feels like a moving narrative, and it was very real. And that piece of it, just how they came together and did this as this underground movement, and the power of intellectual resistance, that they were writing the stuff, that they were putting the words out there. That's very different than, we've told the stories of survivors who were in the resistance and lived in the woods for 2 years and took up arms, and that's a valid form of resistance. But for so many people, it's not an option. And I think resistance takes many, many different forms, and I see writing and art as incredibly important forms of resistance. So that spoke to me just on that personal level. That spoke to the way I think and the way I tend to react. And I think that the project that we're working on, Marcel and I, and the myriad other writers and artists who have contributed to Hutzpah, we're doing that. We are resisting these ideas and this racism and all of these ideas through telling their stories, by sharing their stories, by doing it through art. It's in many ways, it is a tribute to the White Rose and what they did, but it's a continuation of what they did as well. And I think any art, to some degree, does some of that. So I found that approach to resistance very important, and coming from, as she said, she was the right race. She came from a place of safety and privilege, and was still able to stand up against what she viewed as wrong. She wasn't forced to live in the woods with a gun. She did the right thing when she had no reason to and everything to lose.
Amazing. I think I'll go to Marcel next, because the two of you work together on the story in Hutzpah. And so Marcel, again, the most impactful element in this story to you that inspired you to create your art, and how do you hope it will inspire others?
So I came into that specific story on that issue of Hutzpah a little late in the game. Like, I was aware of Wayne's creative process in putting it together, so I saw it develop. but there had been another artist who'd been involved in the project, and then I came in so I was late, I'm going to say, in assessing like what made this story work for me. What did I relate to in it? And, you know, since then, of course, I've been not just exposed to the story through that, but through other media as well. You know, I've come to see how well known that story is, which makes me very happy of some of the beats and things that we hit in that story. You know, I think when you're dealing with a story like that, I think there are core truths that resonate with people, and whether it gets depicted in a comic book or in a theatrical play or in a film, or through, you know, if you extrapolate that out in other media, you know, that could be music or whatever, those core elements are going to resonate. For me, something that I found and find to have incredible impact, and I think what makes that story resonate and makes it just as contemporary, is the inspiration, both from individual to individual and as a group to other groups that you see present in that story. Because it's been my experience in life that people inspire people. You have to have a person doing something for somebody else to kind of catch that fire. And that's what I really see in that story. You know, like you had these, and they're young. Watching the trailer just now really even kind of hammered home for me, just like these were young people, you know, so they were taking a lot upon themselves to get these messages out into the world. And, you know, historically, we still ask a lot of our young people. You know, the young people bear the brunt of what has come before them, things that they did not set in motion. So they carry that responsibility. But how often do we watch young people kind of rise up to the challenge and just go, you know what, that's enough of that. Or they shunt that off, or they pull their own in. That's what I really see happening in that story, you know, and as Wayne mentioned, the bravery that was exhibited by those young people up to their very end, you know, like they carried that with them to the end, knowing they might not live to see their work through to fruition. So again, there is yet further inspiration. And, you know, our story in Hutzpah ends with, you know, with the leaflets now being dropped by the Allies after you know, the White Rose participants have died, and after, you know, so they don't see that, but they inspired that. And so if I had to distill it down to one word, you know, what is the most important thing in that story? It's about inspiration.
So I might take just a tiny detour here, and then Art, I really want to hear from you. But Wayne, I'm curious for our audience, what led to your picking this story and commissioning a new script for it?
You know, I mean, originally.
Wait.
Yeah. Oh, other Wayne. I'm sorry.
The other way. No, but that's
how often do we have two Waynes?
The two Waynes.
I'll specify.
I'll back off.
Wayne, Brinda, please.
No, I think the thing that really got me was like what Marcel is saying, and also what Wayne was saying too, the idea of youth. You know, there's when we look at plays, I mean, outside of the Diary of Anne Frank, which is about a young girl, what other stories are there where youth is really the central part of it, and the key and the driving force behind the story? And so when I came across the White Rose, and I've known Jim, the playwright, for a while, and when I came across this, I thought, wow, this what impact is. It's the courage, the bravery, the determination of young people, and just what the power of what they can do. That really is what drove me to the play.
So Art, I'm eager to hear your reflections.
There's so much kind of tagging on what everybody said, but when we talk about youth, it's true. We need to realize that when she was executed, Sophie was 21. Hans, I believe, was 24. So these are very young people. And I think what was impactful for me again is them realizing that there is this inherent moral code. We all know that. We know deep down what is right and what is wrong. It's just whether or not we choose to act on it. There was another line in the play where Sophie says, I knew it was wrong. I knew I should be doing more. And she stops and just hesitates with each word. but I was scared. I was afraid to step out. And she eventually does, of course. We talked with the cast of these three choices that we have whenever we see injustice. And again, that's to kind of turn a blind eye, or to say to a small group of people, boy, that's really wrong. We should do something, and nothing's done. Or finally, to do what they did. And that's to stand up and to make a difference, to find others of like mind and join together. And that takes courage. But again, what we need to realize is that we all have that courage within us. And I think, kind of deviating a little bit, Lauren, the biggest challenge for me as a director with this piece was to make sure that my actors weren't just performing a role, that they understood the importance of really recreating individuals who made a significant difference in a horrible world event. We're not just play acting, we're recreating and appreciating, and in a way paying homage to all of those people that suffered through this event. So all of those things rolling, we had times when as a group we cried in the middle of rehearsal, we cried at the end of rehearsal, and we didn't want to tamp any of that down. We wanted to keep that alive, and hopefully when people saw the trailer, they felt something. We talked about the importance of art in this message. We can certainly intellectualize, and we should, and as a history lesson, study what we've done wrong in the past as a race, as a human race, and make differences. But there's nothing like art to get us where we live, right? That song that we can never forget, that makes us cry when we hear it. That piece of artwork that we look at that makes us stop and takes the world away and we reflect. That story we sit in a theater and watch in the darkness. We forget about everything else except becoming part of that artwork. So to have the ability to bring this momentous group to life and to share that with others and have them feel it not just in their head, but in their heart was really important to us as artists working on the project.
Lauren, if I can jump in, that one more thing, that building on what Art was saying, the other thing that really got to me is a museum teacher fellow from the Holocaust Museum. One of the things that I learned is the importance of making sure the truth comes out, that making sure we're telling the true history of the Holocaust and the true history of what was going on, and making sure, so the idea of finding that a true story, not a fictional story, but a true story with true people, with people that actually lived. And that's why Wolfgang was so important on this production. But I think that's the other thing too, that like Art is saying, it's a piece of art, but we're telling truth. You know,
and it's not just exploring the past, Wayne. I mean, we've got to look at those truths that we see in this script and reflect on how do they affect us here today in our country? How do they affect us globally, worldwide? I just unfortunately saw on the news last night another mass grave found in Ukraine. This is happening. These things continue to happen in our world. So we can't bury our heads in the sand or say, it's not affecting me here in the US. I have nothing to do with that. We have to speak up. We have to be involved. We have to become activists however we can to make a difference, to make a change.
And I think, Art, that what you've really just expressed is the evolution in how we approach Holocaust education, from like lessons of the Holocaust without really understanding what does that really mean. That, we understand now that we learn from the Holocaust all kinds of things about how we should be behaving now, how to even think about how we teach facts in the classroom. How do we respond to injustice overseas? How do we respond to injustice in our school, in our community, on our block? Whatever it is, there's so much that we can learn from the history of the Holocaust. We can learn it from the righteous among the nations, which the White Rose are non-Jews speaking up against the Nazis. Other stories like that are all around us. And this is what Chutzpah does. So I couldn't help but think about the way that our comic book series, Chutzpah Superheroes of the Holocaust, tells stories of young people. We have a volume that's about child survivors. And it's so important for young audiences to hear these stories of people who were their age, Wayne Wise, as you said about your students at Chatham. And also for all of us, and my background is in academic history, so I know I would rather watch this play or read Chutzpah than listen to myself lecture about this. I know that, I I can admit it's much more engaging than hearing me give a lecture. And this is how we draw people in a time when we have fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors to put in front of a classroom. And the arts provide us with such an engaging way to bring people in to these histories. So it's fair. I did want to come back to you, Wayne Wise, because you started to say something about picking the story in the earliest day when the White Rose story appeared on the panel for the Arts Festival.
Yeah, that was more of a group effort, the original Chutzpah committee, steering committee. I mean, I fully admit that I came into this while I'm a history major. My dad is a World War II veteran. He's 102, almost 103. He says hi. That I wasn't, I didn't know all the Holocaust stories that I've become familiar with through working with you and the Holocaust Center and the people who preceded you. And there was a lot of conversation around the table of which stories do we tell. And the first volume ended up being all specifically Pittsburgh survivors, which I think was a good choice for the first volume. So while Sophie and the White Rose story had been talked about from the very earliest committee meetings, that got pushed to the second volume where we told the international stories. But let's say at that point, because of the initial arts festival thing, several of the people in the second volume were part of that initial arts festival presentation. We had artists do just drawings of the different people, and then the drawings had informational panels with them, just telling the backstory of it. So I did the research for that drawing and that presentation, and then 2 years later came back to it through that. I saw one of the questions asking about sources, and I don't have any of them right in front of me because it's been 6 years or whatever since I read that. I know there is a wonderful book just called The White Rose, and I cannot tell you who wrote it off the top of my head, but I used a lot of information from that. There was a movie at some point, as well as just, Google is your friend. There's a tremendous amount of information out there. And the Holocaust Center itself provided me with stacks and stacks and stacks of research information for all of these stories.
Going along with that, Wayne, with the other thing too, when Jim was sending us the drafts of the script, he also kept us informed about sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at this source, look at this source, look at this source. And I know that working with Wolfgang, it's like, well, what about this? What about this? So the idea of sources is really important, and resources is really important. And I think that's another thing that we can do for young people. It's like, okay, if you have an opinion, but back it up with a resource. Have some support behind there and show it, because that makes it more powerful. It makes it much stronger. It makes it much stronger presentation, I think. And Art, I know you looked at a lot of the resources from Jim.
Yeah, tagging on to that, Wayne. I know we talk, and this is kind of a nice blend when we talk about. There's a piece that was actually written, a book that was written and actually was geared towards German high school students, called The Short Life of Sophie Scholl by Herman, I think it's Vinke, Binke, that Jim really recommended. It's a very simple, straightforward story, and gave a lot of clues to us as to the personality of the individuals involved in the White Rose. So that's certainly a resource if somebody is interested in looking in The Short Life of Sophie Scholl, that I would definitely recommend. And then you can always look at their letters, the letters and diary entries of both Hans and Sophie in a piece called At the Heart of the White Rose. There's no better way to understand what they were experiencing. There's really interesting sections there when they look back and reflect on, hey, we were early on part of this. We were part of the Hitler Youth. We thought this was fun. It was like the Girl Scouts, Sophie says, since the Girl Scouts were outlawed, but we got to camp and hike and, climb trees and do all this fun stuff. And then all of a sudden, we began to see this evolution of what this was. We had this enlightenment, and you can actually see that, and they reflect on that in some of their diary entries as well. So it's a really good piece. Again, that's called At the Heart of the White Rose.
So changing gears just a tiny bit, Wayne Wise, you began to talk about different forms of resistance, and this is a question that we have from one of our colleagues in Poland in Warsaw at the Polin Museum about the different types of resistance. And I'll get her exact words. She asks if you can speak a bit about various forms resistance can take, and she points to individuals versus groups, armed versus intellectual, and you already began talking about that. I think there is one thing that I would like to say about the play before we get into that, and I've been lucky enough to see it. So one thing that comes across so effectively is how careful people had to be if they were engaged in resistance, how you had to assess people you were talking to, and you can feel during the performance how risky all of this was. Of course, we know intellectually it was risky, but you can see even in the interactions between people, and even between people who are very close, how much you had to keep secret and not reveal. So I'm going to come back to Wayne Wise, having made that note. If you could reflect a little bit more about resistance, you were talking about intellectual resistance. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question. My thoughts. I mean, obviously, is the resistance of stories in Hutzpah. Who I mentioned, armed resistance. There were the people who, fought, actively fought against. We have our local hero Moshe Baran, who lived in the forest for 2 years and actively fought. We have people who just monkey wrench the blowing up train tracks and that sort of thing. Another of our locals whose story we told, Les Banos, who posed as a Nazi for years and monkey wrenched the system from within by sending supplies to the wrong place and forging documents and papers and sneaking people out. So it's so many different forms. I think so much of it is just on a very personal level. Most of us will just never find ourselves in some of those extreme circumstances, we hope. So much of resistance is just keeping the conversation alive, talking to your friends about what's happening in the news and what's happening in the world. Having those conversations with people who don't see it the way you do, trying to point out what you see as the injustices. Posting on Twitter or Facebook, as ridiculous as that can be, it gets the word out there. It shows that not everybody thinks the same way, that there are different points of view. Continuing the conversations, if you are a writer, artist, actor, musician, or whatever, there are ways to incorporate that in your work, whatever that work may be. You said one of the actors said something about this feeling like the most important thing that they've ever done. And I've done a lot of writing and presentation, whatever, and I feel much the same way. The stories I've done in Hutzpah are the most important artistic work I've done in my career, just in terms of what they say and the potential impact they have. And Marcel and I have conversation because he works with the project daily. He's much more aware of the ongoing impact of this. And I sit back here, I wrote these stories, we talk about it, but on a day-to-day basis with my job and my life, I tend to forget that these stories are being taught in middle schools and high schools and colleges, that there are resource guides based on words I wrote, that this lives on and has a tremendous impact on students. I just was a judge on the Waldman International and read some poetry and stories and saw some comics, and seeing some of them use Hutzpah as their reference just made me smile. The work lives on, and say Sophie and the White Rose wrote these pamphlets and distributed them secretly 80 years ago, and we're still talking about it today. You can read those pamphlets online today. The work lives on.
Yeah, and in fact, the art, the poster for the play, we have images taken from the actual leaflets. So it is, they are very much available and alive in the public consciousness. I want to go to Marcel, because we did at the Holocaust Center pre-pandemic an exhibit with art from different volumes of Chutzpah, and we called it the Art of Resistance. So we did talk about many different kinds of resistance, all of which are included in the exhibit, which I hope we'll be able to bring back at some point. But Marcel, any reflections here?
Yes, and I actually want to tie this into what we were speaking about before as well, about inspiration, because now, having listened to everybody, we talked about the importance of youth in activism. So I'm going to allow that pendulum to swing the other way for a second and talk about those of us who are a little bit more mature and the important role that we have, which is, yes, there are numerous kinds of resistance. Obviously, there's active and passive and individual and group and armed and intellectual and political. The form of resistance that I find that underscores everything, though, is spiritual resistance, and how that even leans into resilience. Spiritual resistance, in my opinion, it is the most powerful of them all. It drives all other forms of resistance. And young people, that when we look at their energy, we look at their foresight in knowing the importance of what they delve into, but everybody needs inspiration. It is important for all of us to stand our ground in regards to what we know to be true. Again, when we talk about these core moral truths and what is ultimately right and wrong and how we treat others, we have to be able to live that. We have to show it. And it is important for young people to see older people living that truth. So when Wayne talks about, making a Facebook post or a Twitter post, or, now younger people with young people in their TikToks and or whatnot. But like anywhere we can demonstrate what we believe and what we know to be true, I think it is vitally important for that to be the case. I just recently had a local writer of some renown in just a communication we had. He referred to me as a local peace leader, which took me back for a second, like local peace leader. But I thought, you know what? I'll take it in regards to like the what you would want to be known as, because I have not really utilized the term of activist. I am not an activist. I don't see myself as an activist per se. I am an artist who likes to be active, but I am not an activist per se. But a peace leader, I love that, because that's something you live in. And we all have that capacity to be peace leaders and peace exhibitors. So there's our responsibility. And, and that goes towards spiritual resistance. That's how we remain adamant about what is just not permissible in the world that we are trying to build. So that, to me, like in all the Chutzpah stories we tell, and then even just across media, when I look at other work, like my own personal barometer of what works, what clicks, what is actually connecting with audiences as it should, is what is its spirit? What is the spirit of this work? And it can't come from a place of artifice either, because I think we can sense that when something is just, it's saying the words without really giving us the deeper meaning, giving us a deeper connection. Like, you have to mean it. It's just like individuals, like if you're putting a message out there in the world, you have to mean and live in that message. So the best artwork embodies that. Like, you are putting some of yourself in that, you are putting some of the world in that. These Chutzpah stories are all real stories. In that regard, some of that work is done sort of for us. Like, if we're really doing it, if we're excavating that work correctly, as both of our Waynes here have done in telling the White Rose story, there is a real beating heart there, and it's our job to put that out in the world, so like people really connect with it and remember that these are real, actual people who had real spirits, and it's our job now to carry that forward. So I hope that all kind of tied together somehow.
Yeah, if I can, to tag on to what Marcel said, excuse me, Wayne. When you talk about the responsibility of those of us that are a little bit more mature, and I like that term rather than older, I mean, I think within the White Rose story, we see that. Hans and Sophie were permitted by their parents to be wide thinkers, I like to say, rather than free thinkers. I mean, Robert Scholl really promoted a household in which we could look, explore, look at differences between people, try to understand them and accept them. Magdalena sort of kept the house together and kept things in order, but those children were taught from an early age that it is fine to look at the question, to see differences and not be frightened by them, but to accept them and see what we can learn from them. So when we look at each other and see differences, we shouldn't be challenged or frightened or threatened. We should be embracing and find, I love this, let's explore this more. Oh, this really isn't for me. And I think it's the responsibility of those that teach the youth to be able to do that. Just as propaganda can turn youth the wrong way, we can do a positive propaganda to allow the youth to understand that it is fine to question, challenge, to look and accept differences.
And Art, going along with that, there's a line in the play, there's a moment in the play where before Sophie goes off to college, where she's with her father, and her father says, don't accept what is being said to you. When you have an opportunity, question it. Don't accept it, question it. And that was such a directive by her father to her, you know. And Lauren, I just saw something that came across with the Q&A that I think is really interesting from Michelle. So the students saw the injustices despite the fascism and crackdown and distortion of information received. Any hope for a red rose in Russia? I hope so. I think the key to this is making sure that we get the word out to as many people as possible. You know, let's get the word out. Let's get the play out to people in Ukraine and Russia. And like we're going into Poland, we're going into these different countries. I think the key is to, if you're going to do it like the White Rose, we inspire the young people and show the young people, hey, they did it, you can do it, you know? And I think that's the key through Chutzpah, through the work we're all doing on this. If we're inspiring young people, like Hitler said, you know, the way to get to change is to get to the youth. Well, let's do it in a positive way. The way you get to change is to go through the youth. And that's what it is. So if there's a hope for a red rose in Russia or just anywhere, you know, not anywhere, I think it can be really, really, really important. So I thought it was really interesting.
So I want us to go to the Q&A, and I want to ask you all again to please, for our attendees today, put more questions into the Q&A. These questions are so good. And the first one I want to share is something that I thought about, not exactly as this is phrased, but when I was watching the play, I had a lot of questions about Hans Scholl. So the question in the Q&A is, why do you think Sophie's name is more recognizable than her brother Hans? Who was said to have started this group? And I want to add to that, Hans really undergoes a major change during the play, but we don't get into that. So it left me, I mean, we have a certain amount of time and it's wonderful, but I was thinking, I want to see that change in Hans. So maybe Art, I'll take this to you.
I think that could be the follow-up piece. That could be the sequel, or White Rose 2. Jim, we had an original piece that we worked with Jim, and we went back, and it was, when we looked at it, we felt it was trying to cover too much in a short period of time. We had to decide where we wanted to go. And so Jim centered and decided, I want this piece to be Sophie's story. This is kind of Sophie's arc through it. So it's not that we're ignoring Hans, it's just that Jim chose to tell the story through Sophie's reality. And that's why when you see the piece, she narrates for us. So the actual physical piece literally takes place in minutes before her execution. But she steps out and tells us, here's how I got here. And so we have this kind of hour-long flashback. And we just chose to do that through Sophie. I'm not really sure why Jim preferred that lens rather than Hans. I just think it's interesting because she was younger. She was a woman ahead of her time too. She spoke out, and she had that spunky, feisty, artistic vision that a lot of people, I know Wolfgang commented that his dad talked about that she was he considered her a bit of a tomboy, that she was out there, she was active. And so I think it was just that voice that Jim wanted to bring forward. But there's certainly a lot to explore with Hans as well. And actually, he was much more involved in the group earlier on. He knew the danger of it and was quite worried when Sophie became part of the resistance.
Anyone else want to add there?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would think, the thing I love about it is, again, going back to looking for stories of truth and looking for feminine heroes and heroines. I think there's something really, really compelling about seeing the transformation of Sophie and watching that and saying, okay, well, here's a guy, sure, guys can do it, but here's a transformation of a girl. Here's a transformation of the younger sister, the younger sibling, let's say, and what she discovered, her discovery, and how it led to, and that's, I think there's something very powerful about that story.
I think you're right. And not really briefly to talk about why her narrative is so compelling. I mean, she's a young woman, and so many of these stories center around young men, which is not to say that her brother's story wasn't an important story as well. But, we're talking about a whole group of people whose stories have been underrepresented anyway. So I think there is just something compelling. And I think also her as a younger sibling, maybe having seen her brother and what he dealt with and went through, there's something to be said for, what did that look like to her? There's so many factors involved in that. But,
and Marcel, when they had been arrested, and they were being interrogated the agent in charge of it really provided Sophie several opportunities to back out, to say she was influenced by her brother. She didn't know what was happening. She was just a victim kind of being pulled along. And she didn't take that. She said, no, I knew exactly what I was doing. And this was a choice I made for the betterment of my country. I deserve the exact same punishment. If you're going to give that to my brother, I deserve the exact same treatment because I was equally involved.
I want to add to that one thing that moved me so much in this production, in this play, is how it's so well acted. That the actors portraying Sophie and Hans, it feels like a sincere sibling relationship. Like you really can see like the love and respect between these two people playing out on the stage. And so I got to see it 2 times, once as a rehearsal and once as the fully staged recorded time. And each time I have siblings. I really believed that sibling relationship. I mean, you could see.
Thanks, Lauren.
It's so good.
Glad to hear that.
So we have one more thing in the Q&A and I feel like I didn't see one question that you referred to, Wayne. So I don't know if I'm not seeing everything.
It was in the chat. It was in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I was confused because I've done a number of these and I haven't known that to happen before. So, okay. But there's a great question. I'll read the whole thing and I want to take one piece of this, if I may, because this is something that I've thought about a lot and I teach. It reads, when I teach the Holocaust, most of my students find it hard to understand the bravery of those who resisted the Nazis. They don't fully understand a world where freedom of speech does not exist. How can the story of the White Rose help them to understand the nature of resistance? Does the fact that Sophie and Hans came from within the system and rejected it make their story more powerful? So this is such a great question. And I want to take the last part of it about because they came from within the system. Does that make it more powerful? Indeed, from inside the system is the most powerful place to resist. So the Holocaust Center works with this wonderful scholar, leader, Irvin Staub is his name, and he is really the foremost expert on active bystandership. So what many people would call an upstander, I'm calling an active bystander, where a bystander is defined as someone who's in a position to know what's happening and in a position to act. Okay, so we have passive bystanders who don't do anything, or worse, become complicit or become perpetrators. And then you have people like Hans and Sophie, who are active bystanders. They see what's happening and they're in a position to act. The most powerful active bystanders come from inside whatever the group is from which the perpetrators come. So in that question, I can see that you're understanding part of it, part of how this works. Yes, of course it's powerful. They were, they were part of that process to attempt to brainwash the youth of Germany. And so they knew, they were really in a position to know what was happening. And they decided it was wrong. Now, the question of how do you get a student to understand a totally different context, that is so hard. One thing that I talk about when I'm teaching, and is it successful? I don't know, but I have to tell my students that we are talking about what I've heard a scholar refer to as a perverse ethical universe. What was normal and acceptable in that society is completely different from how we think about our society now, where violence, not only was it tolerated, it was expected. Just to flip our understanding of the world on its head, and you have what that reality was. So there are enough first-person narratives from young people. I would point you to Alex Zapruder's Salvaged Pages, which is a collection of diaries written by young people during the Holocaust, and see what that experience was like. Have your students interact with primary sources, with first-person testimony. And that really is the best way to get them to think about what a really different kind of reality might have been, where there was not free speech, where telling the truth was a punishable offense. That is the power of keeping these stories alive and asking those really hard questions. How do you get a student from our context to relate to this at all? And yes, I absolutely believe the story of the White Rose is a really powerful tool to get students into that climate, into that experience. And I hope that none of us ever really know what this is like.
Absolutely. And, and speaking as an educator as well, you have these text to text connections, text to self connections, text to world connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and for you that's teaching young people the Holocaust and teaching young people this history, any history, but especially this history, really look for text to self connections. Really make sure they're making text to self connections, but also understanding the truth behind it, what was going on. That this is like Lauren is saying, look at the truth and then look for the opportunities to make those text to self connections. What would you do if you were Sophie? Would you have the courage if you were in the middle, if you were a member of the Hitler Youth, and somebody came up to you and said, "What book are you reading?" Right? And it's like, well, Heinrich Heine was a Jew. Well, so, and what she did and how she, and just the integrity, I think that's where the power of young people are. And I think going along with what you're saying, Lauren, yeah, that's being in the middle of it and resisting against it. And actually them seeing truth and seeing actual people do this. I think that's the power. Art, you want to, as a theater?
Yeah, I think, by letting them read things like Hutzpah, by having them watch The White Rose, Jim and I worked hard. The first few scenes, and Lauren, you kind of alluded to this, really show a quote unquote average German family. So hopefully there's a connection there that, oh, they're just like us, or this was a regular family, a regular brother and sister connection, so that then hopefully they can identify, and then we move past that and we see how they take action. Letting them see, or hopefully having them watch pieces like this will help it be easier for them to identify. These are everyday heroes. Sophie and Hans, there's a section in the play where the group almost crumbles. They're fighting. There's great dissension among the members as to how to proceed. They weren't superheroes. They were just people who took heroic action. And I think if we keep reinforcing that with the students, hopefully we'll get that message through.
To use your phrase, Lauren, I think some of us also pointing out, and I think this is the way you phrased it, the perverse moral universe a lot of people are living in right now and trying to spread. We live in a society at the moment where people are justifying violence against people who disagree with them. We're living in a society where there's an attempt to limit what can be talked about in schools and in the media and education. That perverse moral universe is right next door. We don't have to look far to find people who already believe that way.
Like sometimes we look at history, hey, this happened, what, how many years ago?
Mhm.
No, like you're saying, Wayne, hey, it's right next door. It's in our world. I mean, we're living it, you know.
Mhm.
I hate to say that history repeats itself, but you know, we don't have to look too far. You know, we don't have to go back 40, 50, 60, 70 years.
Exactly.
And I think probably for all of us, that's what motivates us to keep doing this. Because we know the more awareness we build about horrible injustices of the past, we can understand what's happening in our present. And I'm afraid that our time together is running out. We were supposed to end at 2:00. I feel like anytime I talk to all of you, I could talk for hours and hours with you. I love hearing from you and hearing your perspectives. I want to leave each of you any concluding thoughts. We might go a couple minutes over here.
Wayne, you want to go first?
Just thanks everybody for making me a part of this. This project has been life-changing for me. Hopefully what contribution I have can be life-changing for other people. Not to be too presumptuous, but I hope the message gets across. So thank you everyone for making me a part of this.
I want to echo Wayne's thoughts. Thank you all for just a wonderful conversation. You know, a theme in Hutzpal Volume 2 that I've come to repeat is ink and paper changes the world. And I think that's especially true in Sophie's story. That's a mandate that I take very personally serious. I'm a comic book artist, and that is ink and paper changing the world. Fortunately, though, we also live in a day and age where communication happens much more rapidly, and we can watch things unfold in real time. And so we have one less excuse for staying as involved in things in the world now, which is we know when things are happening right now. So I think it's just our moral imperative to stay plugged into that world. It's easy to want to tune out. And I'm not saying that we have to be immersed in it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not healthy either. But I think it is vitally important that we stay plugged into that world and stay attuned to what's happening in the world. So thank you for allowing me to be tuned in here with all of you today.
Well said, Marcel. I'll just jump on that too. Thank you. We talked a little bit about resistance. Realize this is resistance. There's a reason we're all together here on this Sunday afternoon for an hour, just talking about it, keeping it alive. So I want to thank you for being a part of that. I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of it, for letting me express my voice through art. And then ask you please to just it's an hour and 15 minutes. Take an hour and 15 minutes to watch the White Rose Project by Prime Stage. And please, if it moves you, if it speaks to you, please share that with as many people as possible.
And I'm jumping along with that too. And I'd say, if, you know, we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. I mean, you can definitely email us at admin@primestage.com, and we'll definitely make sure we pass it along. So, you know, and I think that there's other females that came across in one of the Q&As and in the chats too, that other female heroines and other female resistors. And I think as far as in theater, we can do this. In art, we can do this. And I think this is our job. This is part of what we can do. And I'm very excited about exploring what else is out there. You know, I think that I'm glad that Prime Stage and the Holocaust Center are partnering on this, because it is so important. And we're going to continue doing this. So we're going to be looking for more stories and see what else we can bring to people's awareness and inspire people. That's really that's what I see what our job is.
That's right. Connect people to these stories and help them to see themselves in historical figures and be inspired by the courage of the members of the White Rose in this case. So we're going to conclude with, we're going to play the trailer again for anyone who got here maybe a little bit late and didn't get to see it, or I think even if you did see it, you'll take something different from it after the conversation we just had. And we will also conclude with a thank you to our sponsors. And I will thank all of you, the panelists. Great to see you all. I'm looking forward to continuing to work together on many wonderful, important projects. And to everyone who came today, thank you so very much.
Lass mich dölja bjudna till und mit der den Staat kämpfen.
Heil Hitler!
No one ever talked about what was really happening, but we knew. Even as children, we knew something bad was going on.
What are you reading? That book there, what is it?
Poetry?
Whose poetry?
Heinrich Heine?
Heinrich Heine was a Jew.
The press, the radio, the TV, they're all run by the Nazis. And if anybody dares to print the truth, the Nazis say it's fake and arrest them. Every single word out of Hitler's mouth is a lie.
Every person deserves the government it is willing to tolerate. Leaflets of the White Rose.
Derjenige, der die Jugend hat, hat die Zukunft.